The woman standing at my gate wore a lemon-yellow blazer like it was a battle uniform. Her arms were crossed, sunglasses perched on her overly powdered nose, and her lips pursed like she'd just licked a lemon. "You'll want to hear this offer, mister." "Barnes," she said, voice sharp as the gravel under her heels. "The HOA board has voted unanimously. We're prepared to make you a generous deal for your ranch." I leaned against the fence, wiping sweat off my brow. I'd been hauling hay since sunrise, and the last thing I wanted was to deal with another suburban Karen trying to throw her weight around. "Let me guess," I said. "You want to bulldoze my land and slap up some more overpriced condos." Her name was Sheila Cranford, HOA president of the Hawthorne Ridge subdivision about a mile down the road. She'd shown up uninvited, flanked by two other board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Sheila gave a tight, practiced smile. "We want to expand our community amenities. A clubhouse, maybe a pool." "It's nothing personal, but your ranch is in the way of progress." "Funny," I said, "because I didn't put my ranch up for sale. We assumed you'd see the bigger picture." Sheila took a neatly folded contract from her leather folder. "We're offering fair market value, actually, a bit over to be courteous." I didn't even look at the paper. "And if I say no," Sheila's smile dropped like a curtain, "then the HOA will explore other options. Eminent domain is a thing, you know." I laughed, loud. So did my dog, Duke, who barked right on cue. "Lady," I said, "you have no idea who you're talking to." Sheila's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." I walked over, opened the gate, and motioned them in. "Come on. Let me show you something." They hesitated. Heels and cow pastures don't mix, but followed me far enough to where the land sloped up. From there, you could see the entire Hawthorne Ridge neighborhood, all neat rows of beige boxes and vinyl fences. "You see that?" I said. "All that land your precious HOA sits on?" "Yes," Sheila said, folding her arms again. "I own it." There was a long pause, like they thought I was joking. I wasn't. "I bought the land at auction 15 years ago, leased it to a developer. They defaulted and the bank sold off the homes one by one, but they never transferred the land deeds. I still own the dirt under every one of those houses." Sheila's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "That's not possible," she said. "It's legal. I checked, twice. The HOA owns the roads, the signs, and the clubhouse. But I own the land under every front yard, every backyard, every walkway, and your HOA never bothered to read the fine print." Her face went red. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said. "Keep pushing me to sell and I'll start charging monthly land use fees. Retroactive." Sheila turned on her heel and stormed back toward her car, the other two board members trailing behind her like confused ducks. I leaned against the fence again, watching them go. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning started quiet, too quiet. I was sipping black coffee on the porch, staring across the pasture when Duke let out a low growl. I followed his gaze. A white pickup truck with no plates rolled past the edge of my fence line, slowed down, took photos, then kept going. I didn't like that. After breakfast, I drove into town. The county clerk's office was buried behind the library. A dusty building with flickering fluorescent lights and a single employee, Edna, who'd been working there since the Reagan administration. I handed her the file I'd kept in a fireproof box since the day I bought the land, the original purchase agreement, leasebacks, and the clause most people missed, the revertive interest clause. She adjusted her wire frame glasses. "You're not joking." "Didn't think you'd doubt me, Edna." She flipped through the aged pages. "This clause was buried deep. If the developer defaulted and failed to transfer land titles within 5 fiscal years." She tapped page 11. "Then legal ownership reverts to you." "Yep. And the HOA didn't know. They didn't even ask." She gave me a look I knew too well. "They're gonna come back harder. I'm counting on it." By the time I got back home, my mailbox had been stuffed with a thick manila envelope marked urgent. Inside was a cease and desist letter from a law firm called Ferris & Locke, with a threatening tone and enough legal jargon to choke a goat. They accused me of interfering with community expansion efforts, malicious obstruction of planned development, and bizarrely, operating an unauthorized agricultural enterprise in proximity to a residential zone. I read it twice, then tossed it into the burn barrel out back. Later that afternoon, I got a call from my cousin Tessa. She's a land use attorney in Austin, sharp as a tack and twice as fast. "You're making waves," she said before I could say hello. "Someone on the HOA board called my firm looking for representation." Guess whose name came up in the conflict check? They're lawyering up. They're flailing. Also, 2 of the properties in that subdivision have started receiving letters from a company claiming the land beneath their homes is under dispute. "You know anything about that?" "I didn't send anything yet." "Well, someone did, and it's stirring the pot. Word is half the neighborhood's in a panic." That night, I installed 2 more trail cams along the fence line. Around midnight, headlights lit up the eastern field. 2 figures hopped the fence, one carrying a gas can. I watched from the shadows with a 12 gauge resting on my arm. They crept toward the barn. One of them knelt near the wall and began splashing liquid. "You boys lost?" I asked, stepping into the moonlight. They froze. One dropped the can and bolted. The other tripped over a fence post and hit the ground hard. Duke barked once from the porch. "Sheriff's gonna love hearing about this," I said, pulling out my phone. I handed the footage to the sheriff the next morning. He whistled low after watching it. "That's attempted arson," he said. "You recognize either of them?" The one who ran looked like that lanky guy who follows Sheila around. "Board secretary, I think. I'll let you confirm," he nodded. "We'll bring him in." "You pressing charges?" "Absolutely." 2 days later, the local news ran a story. Rancher Foyle's HOA board members' alleged arson attempt. They didn't name names, but the gossip mill kicked into high gear. The Hawthorne Ridge Facebook group exploded. I didn't have to look, it was Tessa who sent me screenshots. One homeowner wrote, "We were never told the land wasn't owned by the HOA. Is that even legal?" Another added, "If we're sitting on someone else's property, what happens to our mortgages?" The panic had started to spread. Then came the kicker. I received a certified letter from a title company. It was a request for a quitclaim deed, essentially asking me to sign over the land beneath the subdivision in the spirit of community cooperation. No payment, no negotiation, just a signature and a pat on the back. I drove straight to the title company and asked to speak with whoever sent it. A nervous man in a cheap suit emerged from a glass office. "Just a formality," he said, sweating. "Purely procedural. The HOA is simply trying to formalize what was always assumed." I cut him off. "You're asking me to surrender land I legally own for nothing," he chuckled nervously. "It's not nothing, you'll have the gratitude of over 100 homeowners." "Did Sheila put you up to this?" He hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to say." I left without another word. The next week, 2 homeowners knocked on my door. A retired firefighter named Lewis and a nurse named Marcy. Both looked exhausted. "We need to talk," Lewis said. "They're lying to us," Marcy added. "About everything." I invited them in. Lewis laid it all out. The HOA had called an emergency meeting and passed a resolution claiming I was illegally squatting on development land and that they were in negotiations with the county to enforce a removal order. "They told us your ranch was never supposed to be here," Lewis said. "They handed out flyers saying you were a danger to the neighborhood." "They're trying to turn everyone against you," Marcy added, "but when we looked into it, your name's on the county plat maps, in bold." I poured them each a coffee. "I've got every deed and document to prove it," I said. "But I'm not just playing defense anymore," Lewis leaned in. "What do you mean?" "I'm filing to reclaim land use rights. If the HOA wants to push, I'll pull the rug. Every homeowner there signed a leasehold mortgage. If I revoke land access, their property values drop faster than a lead balloon." Marcy blinked. "Can you actually do that with a court order?" "Yes." They looked at each other, then back at me. "We want to help," Lewis said. "There's more of us. People who feel lied to." "Then we build a coalition," I said. "You gather the others, I'll handle the legal side." The next few days were a blur of phone calls, notarized affidavits, and late-night meetings in my barn. Tessa flew in from Austin with a team of paralegals. We set up folding tables and laid out everything: ownership history, lease clauses, contract defaults. One homeowner brought in a sealed envelope they'd found in a file cabinet left by the previous HOA president. Inside was a memo from the original developer, dated over a decade ago, warning the HOA board that the land transfer had never been completed. It had been willfully ignored. Tessa grinned when she read it. This is the smoking gun. We filed a petition with the county court that Friday. A motion to formally affirm land ownership, revoke unauthorized use, and investigate the HOA for fraudulent misrepresentation. By Monday, the sheriff's office had opened an inquiry. Sheila was served papers that afternoon while hosting a beautification committee brunch. I didn't see it, but I heard someone dropped a mimosa. The homeowners started calling for a special election to remove the entire board. Sheila's reign was collapsing, and I hadn't even played my ace yet. The emergency election was set for the following Thursday evening, and tensions were boiling hotter than a cast iron skillet in July. I wasn't a resident of Hawthorne Ridge, so I couldn't vote, but that didn't mean I wasn't involved. Lewis and Marcy had quietly formed a homeowners alliance in my barn. They called themselves the Grounded Rights Council. Not the snappiest name, but I appreciated the irony. At our last meeting, they had 23 homeowners signed on, all with notarized statements declaring they'd been misled by the HOA regarding land ownership. That number had doubled by the next morning. Tessa had arranged a private investigator out of Lubbock to dig into the HOA's financial records. He wasn't cheap, but he moved fast. Within 48 hours, he sent over a preliminary report that made my stomach turn. There were multiple payments, large ones funneled through a landscaping company registered under the name of Sheila's cousin. The invoices were vague: irrigation design, drainage consultation, aesthetic grading. But the checks. They were being deposited into a joint account Sheila shared with her sister, not the cousin. Tessa didn't say anything when she handed me the pages. She just waited. I read them twice, then looked up. "We got him," she nodded. And we're just getting started. The same day, the sheriff's office quietly brought in one of the former board members, the one who'd always looked like he didn't want to be there. Under questioning, he admitted he'd known about the fake invoices for over a year. Claimed Sheila had threatened to sue him into oblivion if he spoke up. That was enough to get the county prosecutor's attention. By Tuesday, the sheriff's office had a search warrant. They served it at the HOA's rented office suite in the strip mall next to the dry cleaner. Deputies boxed up 4 desktop computers, a stack of external hard drives, and a filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. I heard they found a ledger tucked behind a wall panel, handwritten entries, dates, and initials, tracking every donation Sheila had received from vendors and contractors. The news broke that afternoon. This time they named names. Sheila was arrested the next morning on 6 counts of fraud, 2 counts of embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Her mugshot made the front page of the town paper. She was still wearing pearls. Lewis stopped by my ranch around dusk, his truck tires crunching dry gravel. I met him near the barn. "She's denying everything," he said. "Claims the whole thing is a misunderstanding of administrative procedures." "Let her talk herself in circles," I said. "We've got the paper trail." He handed me a folded flyer. "They're still holding the election, but now it's about more than board members. People are talking about disbanding the HOA completely." I raised an eyebrow. "That possible? Technically. If a supermajority votes to dissolve and the county agrees to take over infrastructure, it's legal." "You think they'll go for it?" He tapped the flyer. "After what we've uncovered, they'd rather live next to a landfill than keep this HOA running." That night, I hiked up to the ridge with Duke. From there, the entire neighborhood looked different. Not just the layout, the people had changed. I saw porch lights on where they used to be off, neighbors talking across fences instead of ignoring each other. A few kids were riding bikes along the sidewalk, something I hadn't seen in weeks. Then my phone buzzed. Tessa. They found something else, she said without preamble. In the storage unit Sheila rented under a false name, I waited, there were 2 maps. One marked with red boundary lines, one of them cuts straight through your north pasture. She was planning a land grab. Worse, there's a forged deed in there, dated last year, claiming the HOA had been granted easement through your property. I whistled low. Now that's a felony. Tessa was already ahead of me. We're forwarding it to the county DA. It's enough for a new charge, attempted deed fraud. I remembered what Sheila said the first time she showed up. We'll explore other options. Guess she meant forgery and arson. By Thursday evening, the community center was packed. Cars lined both sides of the street, and folding chairs had been set up outside with speakers broadcasting the meeting. I stayed off to the side with Duke, watching from across the field. One by one, residents stood up and told their stories. A woman in her 60s described getting fined for a non-existent fence height violation. A single dad recounted being harassed over a basketball hoop. Another homeowner revealed that Sheila had threatened foreclosure if he didn't pay a surprise assessment fee, one that had never been voted on. Then Lewis took the mic. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We trusted people to manage our neighborhood, he said. Instead, they used that trust to enrich themselves. They lied to us. They tried to scare us, and they nearly burned down a man's barn to hide it. The room went silent. We have a choice tonight. We can let them keep running things, or we can take back our neighborhood. When the vote was called, hands shot up like wheat in spring. Over 80% voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. The rest abstained. No one voted to keep it. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. The next morning, I met with the County Board of Supervisors. Tessa had already prepped the paperwork, but they needed to hear it from me. I'm not here to collect rent, I told them. I just want the truth respected. This land was never theirs to give away. They agreed to take over maintenance of the roads and utilities. The transition would take time, but it was official. Hawthorne Ridge would no longer be governed by a homeowners association. 2 days later, I rode out toward the ridge with a surveyor. We marked the boundary lines, updated the plat maps, and filed everything with the registrar's office. The land was quiet again. A week later, I got a letter in the mail, registered. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, no greeting. You ruined everything. Hope you're proud. No signature. I burned it without a second thought. Lewis and Marcy dropped by with a few others that weekend. They brought pie and a bottle of bourbon, not to celebrate, just to say thanks. You didn't have to do any of this, Marcy said, setting the pie on the table. I didn't like being lied to, I replied. Lewis nodded. Most people would have sold when the pressure started. Most people don't read contracts for fun, I said, pouring drinks. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the pasture. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of cedar and fresh-cut hay. Things weren't perfect. They never would be. But the neighborhood was quieter now, more honest, and the land was exactly where it belonged. The county's transition team began surveying the former HOA-controlled common areas early Monday morning. A small crew in orange vests paced along sidewalks with clipboards, tagging broken curbs and storm drains that hadn't been maintained in years. No one from the old board showed up. Not even the vice president, who'd once boasted about having executive oversight over mailbox paint color. Lewis called me just before lunch, his voice tight. They found a buried file cabinet behind the utility shed near the retention pond, he said. County workers cracked it open. It's bad, Jack. I didn't ask what he meant. I just drove down there. The cabinet had rusted through in places, but the inside was dry. A field supervisor handed me a thick binder wrapped in plastic. The cover said, Assessment Audit Private. Inside were spreadsheets, handwritten ledgers, and lists of names. Some had red X's next to them. Others had amounts owed thousands of dollars next to lines that read "Non-compliant recommend lien." Tessa arrived 20 minutes later. She'd been in town longer than expected, helping the new homeowners council draft bylaws that didn't read like a petty dictatorship. She took one look at the binder and pulled out her phone. "This isn't an audit, it's a ledger of targeted foreclosures," she said. They were keeping a separate set of books. "Look here, and here these entries don't match anything in the public HOA financials." I flipped to a page near the back. It listed 6 addresses under a heading labeled Phase 2 Enforcement Candidates. "They were planning to evict people," I said. "People who didn't conform," Tessa added. "They weren't collecting fines, they were manufacturing them to justify legal action." The county sheriff and 2 deputies showed up shortly after. The field supervisor had already called it in. A crime scene perimeter was taped off within the hour. The documents were taken as evidence. By evening, the county prosecutor had issued warrants for 2 more former board members who'd quietly resigned just before the election. One was arrested in his driveway. The other was picked up while trying to withdraw cash from a bank across the state line. The local paper ran a front-page exposé the next morning under the headline, "HOA Extortion Ring Exposed." They detailed how the board had used unauthorized fines and fraudulent assessments to scare homeowners into paying cash under the table. At least 5 families had remortgaged their homes. 2 had moved out entirely, one leaving behind a foreclosure they never should have faced. That night, I stood at the edge of the orchard on the south end of my property, watching the lights from the neighborhood flicker through the trees. I hadn't heard a single complaint in days. No cars creeping past the fence line, no strangers photographing my barn, just the crickets and the distant hum of a riding mower. Tessa joined me with 2 mugs of hot cider. "This whole thing could have gone another way," she said, "if you'd agreed to sell that first day. They'd have bulldozed the pasture and buried the evidence under a clubhouse," I finished. "I know. County's filing charges for racketeering," she said. "Multiple counts. The prosecutor's not pulling punches," I nodded. "There's talk about restitution," she continued. "If it goes through, they'll start reimbursing the families who were shaken down. Might take some time, but it's happening." "I'll cover the filing fees for the first 10, I said. She glanced over. "You sure? They've been through enough." The next weekend, the newly formed Homeowners Council held their first public event, a block party with no agenda, no speeches, and no clipboard patrols. Just music, barbecue, and families letting their kids run wild. Lewis grilled ribs like a man possessed. Marcy brought a folding table stacked with homemade tamales that vanished in under 10 minutes. I stayed on the outskirts, near the edge of the green belt. A few neighbors came over to shake my hand. Some just nodded. One old man pressed a small envelope into my palm and walked away without a word. Inside was a handwritten note, "Thank you for not selling." I put it in my shirt pocket and stayed until dusk. By the following Monday, the county had officially dissolved the HOA's registration. The organization that had once issued fines for garden gnomes and demanded backyard inspections was now legally non-existent. Their office was cleared out by a court-appointed trustee and converted into a temporary food pantry for displaced families. The land beneath the homes was still mine. But now I had a long-term lease agreement in place, 25 years. No rent, renewable, administered by the county, not a corporate HOA. It gave the homeowners full use rights without the threat of coercion. In exchange, I kept conservation easements on the undeveloped parcels to prevent future overbuilding. Lewis called it poetic justice. I just called it cleanup. A week later, I got a letter from the state's attorney general. They were opening a broader investigation into HOA misconduct across the county, citing our case as a catalyst. Tessa forwarded me the statement they released to the press. It called our situation a wake-up call for unsupervised private governance in residential communities. I didn't read the rest. I didn't have to. Late that evening, a pickup I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. I stepped out onto the porch, one hand resting on the doorframe. A young woman climbed out mid-30s, suit jacket draped over one arm, eyes tired but sharp. She introduced herself as an assistant district attorney. "We're compiling victim impact statements," she said. "We'd like your input." "I wasn't a victim," I said. She nodded slowly. "You were the one who stopped it." We talked for a while. I told her about the first time Sheila stepped onto my property, the forged easement deed, the burned patch of grass near the barn that still hadn't fully grown back. I gave her copies of everything: the trail cam footage, the notarized affidavits, and the memo from the original developer that had been buried for years. Before she left, she paused at the edge of the porch. "This doesn't happen often," she said. "Most people fold under pressure." "You didn't." "I read my contracts," I said. She laughed, then drove off into the dark. A few days later, a moving truck rolled up in front of one of the houses near the edge of the neighborhood, the one that had sat empty for months. A young couple got out, both looking nervous but hopeful. I waved as I passed by on horseback later that afternoon. The woman waved back. The place was changing. Slowly, but for the better. I spent that evening mending a section of fence on the western edge of my land. As the sun dipped below the hills, I spotted Duke trotting through the tall grass, something clutched in his mouth. He dropped it at my feet, a weathered garden flag, faded and chewed at the corners. It had once read "Proud HOA member." I tied it to a fence post and left it there. A reminder of what used to be, and what wouldn't be again.